Okay, guys. So, as I said, for today's class, inshallah, guys, I will talk about two very important things. Number one, we will talk about Up From Slavery, which is the text that was written by Booker T. Washington. And but before we talk about Up From Slavery, I think we should talk a bit about slavery, right? Does anyone know what slavery is, by the way? Anyone know what slavery is? If you know, please just mention it because I can't see whose hand is up.
Okay, slavery is like owning someone to do work for you, and you have their right. They can't have them. You buy them with money,
Exactly.
so they can do everything for you.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's a very hard topic to talk about, guys. I don't like talking about slavery, to be honest, but this is something that we have to talk about because this, unfortunately, it did take place in history, right? So, slavery existed, unfortunately, and when you're a slave, you basically have no rights. You become property. Just like you go to the Jamia or you go to the co-op to buy food or to buy groceries or to buy a bag or to buy shoes or to buy a phone, there was a period of time where people were buying and selling human beings, right? So when you become a slave, you basically have no rights, and the person who bought you or the person who owned you or owns you can basically do whatever he or she wants with you. They can sell you, they can kill you, they can torture you, they can abuse you, they can work you to death. They can basically do anything they want with you. Okay. And guys, we are lucky to be living in a day and age where we don't understand what slavery is. But imagine there was a period of time where slavery was actually legal. It wasn't illegal. It was legal to own slaves. It was legal to buy and sell slaves. It wasn't like done under. It wasn't like Allah done underneath the table. It wasn't like a taboo. It wasn't like it wasn't like rude or immoral to own slaves. It was morally correct. It was legal according to the system to actually buy and sell slaves, and a slave basically had no rights. No, the slave had no rights whatsoever. You can kill the slave, you can torture the slave, you can sell the slave, you can do whatever you wanted. Just as owning, just as you guys have a phone, for example, you guys own a phone, you guys own shoes or socks. You can do whatever you want. You can break your phone, you can sell your phone, you can torture your phone, you can burn your phone. Same thing, when people actually owned slaves, they had the freedom to do whatever they wanted with that human being, with that slave. So let me give you just a brief history. Let me just tell you a bit about the history of slavery, and then maybe we can, if we have time, inshallah, we will dive into the text, okay? So slavery, again, as I said, what is slavery and what do you know about its history? Unfortunately, what happened was back in the days, I think between the 1400s and the 1800s, what happened was the white people, or the Europeans, or the Americans, if you want, the white people, they would actually send these mega ships. They would send these huge ships to Africa, and they would forcefully take usually men and young boys from their homes, and they would kidnap them, and they would bring them back to North America and South America as slaves. Okay, so they had these huge ships. But again, before I show you the pictures, some of these pictures might be a bit, I want to say disgusting, but anyway, I have to show you a few pictures so that you guys get the idea. But let's start with the definition, right? What is the definition of slavery? Slavery is the condition in which one person is owned as property by another and deprived of any personal or human rights. Okay, children born into slavery would automatically become slaves as well. Guys, just imagine with me for a second. Imagine a newborn baby, right? Imagine a baby is born. First day on earth. Wah, wah. Mabruk, you're a slave. What? What? Slave? Yes, you're a slave. A baby born from slave parents automatically becomes a slave. First day on earth, Mabruk, you're a slave. Wow. Right? So what is slavery? It's the condition in which one person is owned as property by another, okay? And deprived of any personal or human rights. So طبعا the slaves, they had no human rights. They had no personal rights. A slave couldn't tell his master, well, I feel like I want to take a day off. Or I feel like I want to chase my dreams. I want to be a writer. There was no such thing, okay? They were basically owned just as property. Just as you own a box or a house or a phone or a car, those human beings were treated as property, unfortunately, okay? So what, again, as I said, from approximately the 1400s all the way to the 1800s, large ships were sent to Africa, and they would forcefully take people from Africa back to North America and South America as slaves. Okay? These people were taken forcefully from their homes. They were kidnapped. Again, mainly men and young boys. They were kidnapped from their homes, and they were taken to be used as slaves in North America and South America. The ships were really, really big, and if you can just imagine the situation, imagine how these people were taken. Do you think these people were given their own rooms and they had a clean bathroom and everything? No,
No.
of course not. Exactly. These guys, again,
No, they don't.
yeah, they were not. They were not. They didn't have their own rooms. They didn't have clean bathrooms. No, these guys were forcefully taken from their homes, and they were packed tightly, just like sardines on this ship. Why did they take so many, and why did they pack the ships with so many people? It's because the more slaves you can carry, the more you can sell. Business, profits. The more slaves I can fit on my ship, the more I can sell when I reach the land, and so therefore I can make more money. So a lot of, you can just imagine the conditions. Imagine the conditions these people were forced to be in. I'll show you a real picture. This is a real picture taken from one of the slave ships. You can see that they're mostly men. They're mostly not even wearing clothes. You can even see at the front over here, you can see that some of them are actually very, very young. They're young boys, 8, 9, maybe 10 years old. Some of them are even actually very old over here. So they would pack as many slaves as they could on the ship, and they would force them back all the way across the ocean, from Africa to North America and South America, okay? And of course they would be used as slaves. Now, guys, imagine what would happen to the slaves on the ship that refused, or the ones that disobeyed, or the ones that rebelled. Or what would happen to the slaves that were sick, for example, or they had a disease? What do you think happened? I can't see the names, by the way, so if you want to talk, just go ahead and talk, please.
They killed them, Doctor?
Yeah, sorry, what did you say?
You can go ahead.
They killed them?
Yeah, they killed
They
them.
killed the slave. They're sick, yes.
Okay, they killed the sick slaves.
I believe
Yeah.
tortured, killed, or thrown off the boat.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, unfortunately, the slaves that were found to be sick, or slaves that had a disease, or the ones that did not obey the rules of their masters, they were simply thrown overboard. Very easy. Why should I give myself a headache if this slave has a disease, if this slave seems to be sick, or if this slave seems to be someone who is not cooperating with me? They simply threw them over the ship. Crazy. Imagine someone knocks on your door, they kidnap your dad, they kidnap your husband's okay, but they kidnap the people you love, they kidnap your brothers, your dad, your uncles, your brothers, and so on, and then they forcefully take them all the way to the other side of the world, and you never see them again. And some of them, as I said, approximately 20%, imagine, 20% of the slaves that they forcefully took from Africa were actually killed. They were thrown overboard. They were not given medical treatment, they were not taken care of, they were simply thrown overboard of the ship because these slaves were rebellious, they didn't want to work, or they were sick. Imagine the brutality, right? So anyway, they forcefully took these slaves from Africa all the way to North America, and then of course when they reached land, the ones who reached the land, so 80% of the ones who reached the land, they were taken as slaves to work on large plantations. A plantation is like a farm, okay? So these Africans were taken as slaves from their country, from their homes, and they were forcefully taken as slaves to America and South America, and they were forced to work in these large farms. The conditions were very harsh. It was very, very cold in the winter. It was very, very hot in the summer, of course. These people had no rights, and they were forced to work on the farms to cultivate cotton, tobacco, sugar, and so on and so forth, okay? Of course, as you can see in the picture over here, they were chained, usually chained, and we had the white masters. So the white masters usually they were sitting on a horse, they had a whip. Actually, I was going to buy a whip to bring it to class to you, so I can show you guys what a whip is, but I was scared that my wife might use it against me. But anyway, you guys get the idea. So they have whips like this to keep the slaves in line, to scare them. And again, if they didn't really work, if they didn't work hard, then they would easily be whipped or punished or even sometimes killed. So life was not easy for these people who were kidnapped from their own homes. They usually lived outside. They did not live inside the house with the white family. طبعا the white family lived inside the house, and the black slaves or the slaves, they actually had a small shed. They had like a small little, a poorly built house made from wood, a small shed where these people lived. طبعا they had no heating. They had it was in the winter it was very cold. طبعا they didn't really have an AC or fans. So in the summer it was extremely hot as well. And they were not allowed to mix. The black people or the slaves were not allowed to mix with obviously the white people, so they couldn't be in the same house. They couldn't go out together, and so on and so forth, right? So obviously, life for slaves or life for the black people was very harsh. It wasn't fun at all, obviously. And the interesting thing about this autobiography, the one we're going to cover together, is that the man who wrote this, he was born into slavery, but then later he got his freedom. So he was born, so his first day on earth, he was a slave, but then later on, when he got older, he actually became free. As I said, طبعا, the slaves had no rights, and they were under the mercy of the slave masters. Imagine you own another human being. Just imagine this for a second. Imagine we're living in a day and age where it is legal to own another human being, and you are free to do with this human being whatever you please, whatever you want. You can whip them, you can punish them, you can torture them, you can kill them, you can sell them. And to be honest, sometimes when I think about slavery, I can't imagine that we actually had a day and age where such a thing existed. How is it possible that people allowed this to happen? Unfortunately, life is not life is not butterflies and rainbows. Human beings can be very harsh, as history shows us. So. A lot of the times when the slaves disobeyed or when the slaves did not do the work properly, the white people or let's say the white masters would mercilessly whip these slaves. They would whip them and they would torture them, and this was all legal, by the way. This was all legal. This is a picture. I do apologize for showing you such pictures, but these pictures have to be seen because these things actually happened in real life, unfortunately. So we have this person, for example, when you whip someone so much, your skin doesn't go back to its normal state. And this is a good example of a slave who was unfortunately whipped on his back. They also had sometimes slaves wear something like this. Can anyone guess what this is for? Why would the white people make slaves wear something like this? Yeah, please talk. I can't see who has their hands up. If you have your hand up, please go ahead and talk.
Sorry again, Dr. Ferran, the question?
Yeah, why? Look at. Do you see the picture in front of you, Bayan?
Yes.
Yeah. Why? What do you think this was? What was this used for? Why did the white people give this to the black people? What was it used for?
I think because they are black, so if they will wear this, they can hear them or see them. I don't know.
Yeah, good point.
Doctor, can I answer?
Yes, go ahead.
Because if they want to leave or run away, they can hear them to catch them.
Exactly.
Maybe, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Very good. Exactly. Anyone else?
Or maybe when they want something from them, they like just ring the bells or something.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that's good as well. But the answer is it's the one where they actually put this on the neck of the slave. Sometimes when the slaves were misbehaving, imagine the white people would put this device, the one you see on your screen, they would put this device on the neck of the slave. Why? For two reasons. Number one, to prevent the slave from running away. Because generally speaking, when a slave wanted to run away, they would run away at night. So by putting this on their neck, number one, you have two bells at the very end of each let's say part. So if the slave tried to run away, then they would make noise. Just as today, if you look at animals today, sometimes we put bells on cows. Sometimes you put a little bell on a cat. If you have a pet cat, your kitten, whatever, you're scared you might lose it. You might have a little tag on its neck. So same thing. So they would actually use this device and put it, and they would make the slaves wear this on their neck. It's very heavy as well. If you look at it carefully, it's made from steel or iron. So this thing was extremely uncomfortable. Number one. Number two, it made a noise. So if the slave tried to run away at night, then you would hear the bells ringing or the bells shaking. So that it would make it very hard for the slave to run away. And also because you see these two poles sticking out on the sides. Remember, these slaves, they usually worked in plantations where there was like a lot of bushes and trees. Because of the two pieces of steel or iron coming out, it made it very hard for the slave to run away. Because these would bump into the trees and the branches and so on. So it would almost be impossible for the slave to run away. But imagine you had this device. Imagine you would wear this. Imagine, how would you sleep wearing this? Right? So again, the white people basically had no mercy. They were not merciful at all towards the black people, towards the slaves. Okay? This is a very short video. Just watch it, guys, and listen very carefully to what this person is saying, okay? And please confirm if you can hear the voice, okay? Can you hear the voice? Listen.
As for the slaves themselves,
Can you hear the voice?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, guys, please listen to this, okay? Very, very interesting video. Listen, and it's also very, very sad, unfortunately.
as for the slaves themselves, they faced unimaginable brutality. After being marched to slave forts on the coast, shaved to prevent lice, and branded, they were loaded onto ships bound for the Americas.
Okay, so two things here. Number one, they shaved the heads of the slaves. Why? Because they thought that the slaves or the black people, they had lice. In Arabic, lice is, I think, amil, right? So again, they shaved them. Not only did they shave their heads, they did something worse. Look what it says here.
And branded.
They branded the slaves. I don't know if you know what this means, guys, but sometimes we brand animals. And when you brand an animal, you get like a hot iron rod and you put it on their skin. Imagine, you have like a hot iron rod. It says, for example, it has like a letter M, for example, and then you put it on the slave's skin to brand the animal or the human being in this case. To tell people that this guy is the property of somebody. So for example, if I was living in that day and age and I was cruel enough and I was barbaric enough to have a slave, then I would have an iron rod that says MF, Muhammad Farran. And every slave I owned, I would brand them. Imagine, you're burning another human being by putting your initials or putting a mark on that slave to tell people that this person belongs to me. Unbelievable, okay? It gets worse. Well,
were loaded onto ships bound for the Americas. About 20% of them would never see land again. Most captains of the day were tight packers, cramming as many men as possible below deck.
Okay, so 20% of them, they never saw land. Why? Because they were thrown overboard. So 20% of the slaves they took were either killed or they were thrown overboard because they were either sick or they were disobedient, okay? And look what he says. He says most of them were tight packers. So the people who took the slaves on the ships, they would pack them just like sardines. They would not leave a room. Because the more slaves I can take, the more money I can sell, the more money I can make.
Were tight packers, cramming as many men as possible below deck. While the lack of sanitation caused many to die of disease, and others were thrown overboard for being sick or as discipline, the captains ensured their profits by cutting off slaves' ears as proof of purchase. As for the slaves...
Oops, sorry, let me go back. Imagine, guy, I don't know if you heard this, but imagine, you know how when you buy something today, you have a receipt? Back in the old days when they used to buy the slaves, they would actually cut off their ears. And their ear would serve as it's like a proof of purchase. It's like a receipt. So imagine today when you buy something, they give you a receipt. Back when they took the slaves, when they bought the slaves and sold the slaves, they would cut the ear of the slave off as proof of purchase. I can't believe it. It gets worse. Wait. Okay.
Of disease, and others were thrown overboard for being sick or as discipline. The captains ensured their profits by cutting off slaves' ears as proof of purchase. Some captives took matters into their own hands. Many inland Africans had never seen whites before and thought them to be cannibals, constantly taking people away and returning for more. Afraid of being eaten, or just to avoid further suffering, they committed suicide or starved themselves.
So imagine, a lot of the Africans, a lot of the slaves, they committed suicide because they're like, what is this life? Why are you kidnapping me? This doesn't make sense. And they also thought that by committing suicide, by killing themselves, their souls will go back to Africa. Yeah?
Believing that in death, their souls would return home. Those who survived were completely dehumanized, treated as mere cargo. Women and children were kept above deck and abused by the crew.
So they would keep the men on the ships. The ships had two floors. They would keep the men on the bottom of the ship, and they would keep the women and the children at the top. And unfortunately, again, because the women were on the top deck, the white people, or let's say the slave masters at the time, they would abuse the women. They would sexually abuse the women, and some of them actually even became pregnant. So they would abuse the women and children. Because remember, they were not humans, they were not seen as human beings, they were seen as mere slaves or even property. Unfortunately, all of these things happened.
While the men were made to perform dances in order to keep them exercised and curb rebellion. What happened to those Africans who reached the New World, and how the legacy of slavery still affects their descendants today, is fairly well known. But what is not often discussed is the effect that the Atlantic slave trade had on Africa's future. Not only did the continent lose tens of millions of its able-bodied population, but because most of the slaves taken were men, the long-term demographic effect was even greater.
So guys, imagine, because the white people, they went to Africa and they took, generally speaking, they took all the men. I mean, imagine you go to a country and you take all the men. What will happen to that country? Who's left to defend that country, right? So what happened was, because they went to Africa and they took a lot of the people they forcefully kidnapped from Africa were men. This made the country very unstable. You understand? So men were not left to defend the country. This made it easier for colonization, for other countries to come and take advantage of those countries. Also, when it comes to getting married and having children, if you remove all the men from a country, how are people supposed to get married? How are they supposed to have children? So because of this whole slavery issue, Africa is still suffering until this day, by the way. Think of Africa. Africa, by the way, is the richest continent in the world. Africa has gold, has diamonds, has minerals. They have almost everything. Yet Africa is the poorest continent up until this day because of colonization and the whole slavery issue. Unbelievable.
When the slave trade was finally outlawed in the Americas and Europe, the African kingdoms whose economies it had come to dominate collapsed, leaving them open to conquest and colonization. And the increased competition and influx of European weapons fueled warfare and instability that continues to this day. The Atlantic slave trade also contributed to the development of racist ideology. Most African slavery had no deeper reason than legal punishment or intertribal warfare, but the Europeans who preached a universal religion, and who had long ago outlawed enslaving fellow Christians, needed justification for a practice so obviously at odds with their ideals of equality. So they claimed that Africans were biologically inferior and destined to be slaves.
Guys, imagine when the white people came to Africa to take slaves, right? They also wanted to spread their religion, Christianity, right? And Christianity, of course, there's no such thing as wallah having slaves and using people as property. So what they did was they changed the word of Christ. They actually changed the words of the Bible, and they told the Africans, well, according to the Bible, because you were born black, you are inferior. Because I'm a white person, I am better than you. Can you imagine? They did this to their own religion to justify slavery. Unbelievable.
Making great efforts to justify this theory. Thus, slavery in Europe and the Americas acquired a racial basis, making it impossible for slaves and their future descendants to attain equal status in society. In all of these ways, the Atlantic slave trade was an injustice on a massive scale, whose impact has continued long after its abolition.
Yeah, so guys, unfortunately, this is like a short history of slavery, of how the white people forcefully kidnapped black people from Africa. They took them to North America and South America and used them as slaves. And Africa, to be honest, is still paying the price up until this very day. The people who survived, that's why we have African Americans right now in America. Though the African Americans you see in America today are actually descendants of the slaves that were forcefully taken 100 years ago or 200 years ago. It's crazy. It's crazy. Okay, so what happened after that? So, okay, they were slaves, they were taken to North America, but then what happened after that? So, eventually, at around, like in 1870, eventually people said, you know what, I think slavery is wrong. Finally, after what, maybe 400, 500 years of slavery, people said, you know what, this isn't right, we have to abolish slavery. So when slavery was later abolished around 1870, the white people in America had a hard time accepting black people as equal human beings. So imagine, slavery was abolished, they're like, you know what, now it's illegal, you cannot own a slave. So around 1870, They're like, you know what? We cannot have slaves. Slavery is illegal. Remember, it used to be legal. It wasn't, it wasn't bad to have a slave back then. It was okay to have a slave. But then after 1870, they're like, you know what? No, this is wrong. Human beings have rights. Even if you're dark-skinned, we should all be treated equally, right? But the problem was, in society, white people still did not see black people as equals. Imagine, guys, I want you all to imagine it's 1869. Remember, slavery was abolished in 1870, huh? So imagine it's 1869 and you own a slave. All of us own slaves. And then imagine one day the government says, guys, you know what, slavery is wrong. You cannot own a slave. And the guy, you were beating, you were torturing this poor slave yesterday. And then the government says, you know what, guys, slavery is wrong. How are you going to react? Are you going to say, oh, I'm so sorry, Habibi, wallah, for torturing you for those past years? You know what? Let's just hug it out. Let's just be BFFs forever. It's not going to happen. Because the white people had no respect for anyone who looked different from them. If you are dark-skinned, then you are inferior, according to them. So even though slavery was abolished in 1870, in America, people had a hard time accepting black people as equal human beings. They still saw them as animals, as dirty human beings, as people who were slaves. You understand? So, many faced racism and discrimination, and black people were not allowed to vote. They were not allowed to own land. They were not allowed to open businesses or even get married to someone from the white race. And segregation was established. So these poor black people who were forced, who were kidnapped from their own countries, from their own homes, eventually after, like in 1870, yes, slavery was abolished. Yes, alf mabruk, yes, slavery was abolished. But now they went into another phase, into another stage of their lives, and that stage was discrimination. White people did not accept black people as equals. They were not allowed to vote. Black people were not allowed to vote. They were not allowed to open a business. They were not allowed to own land. They were not even allowed to marry a white person. Can you imagine? And then, of course, this is where we have discrimination and segregation in America's history. For example, in Kuwait, in the Gulf, we have segregation, but not based on race. We have segregation based on gender. Like in AOU, for example, we have a boys' side and we have a girls' side. In Kuwait, we have schools for boys, we have schools for girls. So in Kuwait, we have segregation based on gender. But imagine, in America, they had segregation based on race. So if you were a bit dark-skinned, you were not allowed to do certain things. If you were white-skinned, if you were fair-skinned, you had the right to do whatever you wanted. You understand? Let me give you some examples. Everything you see is a real example taken from America's history. This is the period of segregation or the period of discrimination where black people, they were discriminated against simply because their skin was darker than their peers. Here you have a drinking fountain. In Arabic, nafurat may. Okay, we have a drinking fountain. You can see that they were not even allowed to drink from the same place. They had separate bathrooms, they had separate classrooms, they had separate institutions. Everything was segregated. A black person and a white person cannot go to the same bathroom. A black person and a white person, they cannot get educated in the same place. They had schools for black people, schools for white people. A drinking fountain. Look, you have a sign that says here white, go to the left. And then they usually called the black people colored. Imagine, the black people, they were called colored, right? Here's a good example. Look at this. Here you have the main drinking fountain on the left. You see it says white at the top. And then there's like a small extension where the colored or the black people were allowed to drink from. Imagine, a black person could not drink from the main fountain. If you did so, you could easily be put in prison. It's crazy. Here's another example. This is a sign outside the business, outside the company. It says, help wanted, white only. Can you imagine? Imagine you have a sign outside a company that says, I'm sorry, we only hire white people. Guys, I want you to imagine this happening in Kuwait, la samahallah. Imagine you have a European company or like an American company, they come, they open in Kuwait, and then you apply, and you are very qualified. And they'll say, oh, I'm so sorry, we don't hire Arabs. Naam? Yeah, I'm sorry, your name is Muhammad, we can't hire you. But I'm qualified. I know you're qualified, but you're Arab. I'm sorry. Wallah, your skin is too dark. You look too Arab. You have to look a bit more like the Europeans. Yeah, maybe put some lenses on. Change your hair to yellow. Like you have blonde hair. Wear like blue lenses, and then we might hire you. It's crazy. It's crazy to think of a day and age where people were not given jobs because God created them a bit darker than others. It doesn't make sense, but this is the reality of the history that we have, unfortunately. This is another example from a bus. On a bus, if you had a bus, the black people were supposed to sit at the back, and the white people can sit anywhere they want. And not only that, if if the bus is full and a white person comes on the bus, then a black person must give their seat to the white person. Imagine. Look at this bench. It says Europeans only. Oh my God. Guys, imagine the next time you come to my class, or the next time you sit somewhere and someone says, I'm so sorry, because you're an Arab, you can't sit here. Or wallah, because you're wearing a hijab, you can't sit here. Can you imagine? That's crazy. There's a bench, it actually says Europeans only on it. They weren't even trying to hide it. This is a sign from like a laundry, from one of the laundries, al-masbagha we say in Arabic here. It says, we wash for white people only. Can you imagine? Imagine how racist these people were. We wash for white people only. It doesn't even make sense from like a business point of view. If you own a business, you want to wash for everybody. Black, white, pink, Barney the dinosaur, everybody. I don't care what color your skin is. But these people were so racist. They're like, we don't even want your money. We don't even want your money over here. I think someone wanted to say something. Please, if you have something to say, please say it.
Yes, and Doctor, also in some restaurants, I heard about sometimes they put like a sign outside, like no dogs, no black people.
Yeah, exactly. That's so true. Yeah, this is so true. And this is also a sign from a restaurant, the one you see on your screens. We serve whites only. Can you imagine? That's crazy. Akdar, let me ask you, Akdar, what's your favorite restaurant?
Vapiano.
Vapiano,
The
right?
avenues. Yeah.
Yes, Akdar, I want you to imagine the next time you go to the Vapiano, you go to your favorite restaurant, and just before you walk in, the person says, oh, I'm so sorry, Akdar, because you are from Kuwait, because you're wearing hijab, we cannot let you in. How would you feel?
It wasn't fair. Like, of course, I will feel sad and upset and maybe angry.
Exactly. Yeah, you're going to be very angry. You're going to say, Naam habibi, wallah ana warrik. You understand? You might take off your heels and you might hit him on the head. Right? So, it's so frustrating to not be served, to not be treated equally, simply because, wallah, your skin is darker, or because you're a woman, or because you're wearing a hijab. Imagine if it was the other way around. Imagine if we had segregation, wallah, based on gender. Wallah, this restaurant is only for men. I'm sorry, you're a woman, you cannot walk in here. Bismillah, alaysh, why? No. This restaurant, we only serve men. We have no respect for women. We don't serve women. It was exactly the same. Here it says we serve whites only. Imagine. Look at this one here. It says waiting room for white only. By order of the police department, mashallah. Imagine you go to a hospital, you're trying, and you want to see a doctor. There's like a waiting room, but the waiting room is only for white people. If you're black, you have to stand outside. I mean, the discrimination was just on another level. I don't know if anyone knows. Does anyone know who these guys are?
They're the Ku Klux Klan?
Exactly, yes. They're the KKK. They stand for the Ku Klux Klan. They're like the Daesh of America. And by the way, they still exist. These guys were an extremist. I don't know why they wear this funny hoodie. It looks like do you know how when you clean your ears, you use like a Q-tip? So yeah. They're wearing a very strange outfit, but these were white extremists who would basically harass black people. They would torture black people. They would sometimes even kill black people. So if they found a black man walking in a white neighborhood, for example, they would chase him, they would harass him, they would abuse him, they might beat him up. And these people still exist until this day. Believe it or not, there was a group that they were made just to harass and torture and abuse black people. Unbelievable, right? The white people also tried to make the black people hate themselves. They tried their best to show society that black people are ugly, they're disgusting, they're dirty, they're filthy, they're subhumans, they're not even worth our time and attention. Imagine. Even until this day, guys, if you watch American movies, even until this day, think about it. If you see an Arab in an American movie, he's usually portrayed as someone who's angry and someone who's a terrorist. If you see a black man, he's usually a drug dealer or like a gangster. If you see a white man, subhanAllah, he has a mental illness. What a coincidence. Even until this day, if you look at the way certain minority groups are portrayed in movies, you will still see that black people sometimes are still portrayed as gangsters, drug dealers, and so on and so forth. Right? So, again, just look at the way they draw this person. Look at the way look how angry he is, the dangerous black man, and so on and so forth. This was everywhere in their magazines, in their newspapers, in their books, and so on and so forth, yeah? And that's why the black people, they wanted, at the time, they wanted the black people started to kind of have a counter, let's say a counter effect on the ads that they were seeing. And black people wanted other black people to like themselves for who they are. You know, black people have their own style of hair, for example. So black people started copying white people to be accepted. For example, Michael Jackson. If you remember Michael Jackson, he was born as a black person, but then he died as a white woman, white guy, you understand? So a lot of the time, the celebrities at the time, they wanted to appear more like the white people because this is their standard of beauty. If you think of a typical Barbie, when you, if I tell you to imagine a Barbie, you don't imagine a black Barbie. You imagine the typical Barbie we have in our heads is a skinny white woman who has blonde hair and blue eyes. This is the standard of beauty that they wanted to push across the world. But what's wrong? You can still be black and beautiful. Black is beautiful. You understand? So again, black people started to kind of, you know, even if you think of
Doctor?
Yes, go ahead.
Doctor?
Yes.
I want to mention something.
Yes.
There is in Shahid, like this things is mentioned all this things you're talking about. It's called Dikkat al-Abid.
Oh,
the
nice.
name of the like show or program. Yes, if I want to mention to all the girls can see it. It's mention all these things.
Can you send the video on the WhatsApp
You can
group?
see it in Shahid.
If you
Yes,
haven't-
yes, I will learn it. It's like a program or something like this. It's maybe 10. I don't know how to say it in English. Like مسلسل.
it's a TV
دكة
show.
العبيد. Its name.
Oh, nice.
In Shahid. Yes, TV show. Yes.
Great. Can you send the name
It's
on the
called
group?
دكة العبيد.
Dikkat al-Abid?
Yes, yes, of course. You can see it. It's all mentioned. All things. This things you told
very
about.
nice. That's excellent. Yeah, there you go, guys. See? So even on Shahid, if you want, you can watch something like this, right? So guys, remember, the white people, they wanted the black
Yes.
people to hate themselves. Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And yeah, so the black people started to come out and say, you know what? We are beautiful. We are beautiful. We don't have to copy the European. We don't have to copy the Americans. Even until this day, guys, some people, some Arabs or some Africans, they want to be like the Americans or like the Europeans, to be beautiful. Even some Arabs, they tell you, well, when I want to get married, I want to marry a blonde white girl with blue eyes. Habibi, this is not the Arab world. But where did this guy come? Where did he come up with this idea of beauty? It's because of the American media. It's because of the influence of the Europeans. Their standards of beauty is not like us. In the Arab world, we have dark hair. That's fine. We have dark eyes. That's also beautiful. You can be African. You can still be beautiful. You understand? So yeah, this is the show that your friend mentioned. Also, Dikkat al-Abid also sounds very interesting. So maybe check that out on Shahid if you want to. Yeah. So because of the discrimination, guys, we had people like Martin Luther King. We had people who came out and said, enough is enough. Enough discrimination. What you guys are doing is wrong. Martin Luther King was one of those guys. He was very famous for giving speeches. He was famous for opposing the white people. He was famous for asking for the freedom of the black people. He said, yeah, Jama'ah, he said, guys, we want freedom. As black people, we want freedom. We want to buy land. We want to vote. We want our freedom. What's the point of abolishing slavery, but we still feel like slaves in our own country? You understand? You guys came to Africa. You took us from Africa. You brought us here. Okay, you abolished you removed slavery, but we still feel like slaves. We can't do anything without the permission of the white person. Okay, so Martin Luther King, the guy you see on your screen, he was one of those people who actually fought for the rights of the black people. Unfortunately, he was killed. Taban, everyone who stands up and speaks usually against the system is usually imprisoned or assassinated. So Martin Luther King, he was killed, I think, at around the age of 40. His life was taken short simply because he fought for the rights of the black people. Another good example of someone who fought the system is Rosa Parks. This lady you see, the lady you see sitting down on the bus, her name is Rosa Parks. If you remember, I told you guys, if on the bus, if a black person is sitting on the bus and the bus is full, and a white person comes on the bus, imagine a black person is supposed to give their seat to the white person. So this is a true story about Rosa Parks. She was on the bus, sitting, and the bus was full. And then a white person comes on the bus, and she tells Rosa Parks to, please, Khalsina, move and give me your seat. You know the rules, right? And Rosa Parks says, no, I will not give you my seat. And the white woman says, listen, you know the rules. I'm white, you're black. Just please get up and give me your seat. And Rosa Parks says, no, I'm not going to move. I'm not going to give you my seat. I'm a human being just like you. I'm not going to give you my seat. And then, of course, the woman tells the bus driver says, I'm not going to drive until you get up and give your seat to the white woman. She doesn't budge, and they end up calling the police. And the police arrest Rosa Parks simply for not giving her seat to a white woman. Can you imagine? Can you imagine being arrested, taken to prison, because you did not give your seat to someone else because they are white and you look different? That's crazy. Of course, people started to protest, and by the way, we have a lot of people like Muhammad Ali, the guy you see on your screen. A lot of the black people, they actually ended up converting to Islam. Because in Islam, of course, we don't have white and black. In Islam, we're all equal under God's eyes. We don't have white and black. We don't have superior and inferior. You understand? So, Muhammad Ali, the very famous boxer, he wasn't born a Muslim. He was born a Christian. He was born Cassius Clay. That was his real name. His real name was Cassius Clay. And then, of course, eventually he found Islam and he became a Muslim. Because in Islam, we don't have this discrimination. We have another guy also called Malcolm X. I don't know if you guys know this guy. I don't know if you've heard of him. But again, Malcolm X was one of those people who fought for the rights of the black people. He also became Muslim, subhanAllah. He became Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabbaz. I don't know what that means, by the way. But anyway, he did his Umrah, he did his Hajj as well. And there's a picture of him praying in a mosque, by the way. Over here, I believe it's in Egypt. I don't know, I think it's Sultan Mosque in Egypt. And he was also assassinated, unfortunately. He was also killed because he was fighting for the rights of the black people. So anyone who used to fight for the rights of the black people, they were usually imprisoned or killed because the white people did not want these people to rise up. And of course, think of education. Black people at the time they were not offered a proper education. Okay, we'll talk a bit more about that later, inshallah. There's a very interesting book about Malcolm X's life. It's a true story about his life. There's also a movie. What you see on your screens is it's the poster for the movie, played by the amazing Denzel Washington. He plays the character of Malcolm X, or the person of Malcolm X. And the movie is a bit long. It's around 4 hours long, but it's a very, very good movie. If you care about discrimination, the rights of black people, and the history and so on, this is a movie that you have to watch. It's based on Malcolm X's autobiography, his book. Okay. By the way, Malcolm X, I don't know, I didn't talk about this, but you know what? Does anyone know why he has an X at the end of his name? He had a name, but then he dropped it. Then he put an X. Anyone know why?
Sir, maybe because, as in the story, they didn't know their last name, so they were named as their owner's name,
exactly.
Last name or surname.
Exactly. Very good, Akhdar. Exactly. So guys, imagine back in the days of slavery. Imagine the slave that was taken. The slave would take his master's name. Imagine, for example, imagine I owned a slave. My name is Muhammad Farran. Imagine I own a slave called Michael. His name becomes Michael Farran, so that people know that Michael is the property of Muhammad Farran. Can you imagine? So the slaves that were taken from Africa, their second name, their family name, was given by the master. Whatever their master's name was, it was given to them. You understand? So Malcolm did not like that. Malcolm did not want his slave master's name to be there. So he dropped his slave name and he put an X there. And then, of course, he converted to Islam and then became Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabbaz. I have a small video just to show you where Malcolm X talks about his name. This was before he was killed. Listen, very, very interesting.
What is your real name?
Malcolm X.
Is that your legal name?
As far as I'm concerned, it's my legal name.
Have you been to court to establish that you are?
I didn't have to go to court to be called Murphy or Jones or Smith. Excuse me for answering you this way.
That's
if
all right.
a Chinese person were to say his name was Patrick Murphy, you would look at him like he's insane, because Murphy is an Irish name, a European name, or the name that has a Caucasian or a white background. And a yellow person, Chinese is a yellow man, and he has nothing to do or no connection whatsoever with the name Murphy. And if it doesn't look proper for a person who is yellow or Chinese to be walking around named Murphy or Jones or Johnson or Bunch or Powell, I think it would be just as improper for a black person or the so-called Negro in this country, as we're taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to walk around with these names. And therefore he teaches us that during slavery, the same slave master who owned us put his last name on us to denote that we were his property. So that when you see a Negro today who's named Johnson, if you go back in his history, you'll find that he was once his grandfather or one of his forefathers was owned by a white man who was named Johnson. If his name is Bunch, his grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
My father didn't know his last name. My father got his last name from his grandfather, and his grandfather got it from his grandfather, who got it from the slave master. The real names of our people were destroyed during slavery.
Was there any line, any point in the genealogy of your family when you did have to use the last name, and if so, what was it?
The last name of my forefathers was taken from them when they were brought to America and made slaves. And then the name of the slave master was given, which we refuse. We reject that name today.
You mean you won't even tell me what your father's supposed last name was or gifted last name was?
I never acknowledge it whatsoever.
So guys, you can see from this video that basically when the slave master had slaves, imagine the slave master would give his second name to those slaves. And that's why Malcolm X dropped his family name, because he didn't want people, he didn't want the slave master to be there. Why should he have it there? You understand? So it makes sense. Even though this white guy, the host, the guy who's asking Malcolm X some questions, he really angered me, to be honest. Like, he really wants to know what Malcolm X's family name is. But Malcolm X wisely says, you know what? Our names were destroyed when you guys forcefully took us from Africa. Even today, sometimes you find, again, he gives the example of a Chinese person. Again, if you go to America, sometimes you might find a Chinese person called Michael. Like, Chinese people don't call themselves Michael. They have their own, like, unique names, you understand? So, again, why are we changing our identity? When I was in England, when I went to England, I found you know, sometimes they call Muhammad Mo. Why is Muhammad becoming Mo? Why is Ali becoming Al? Why are we changing our names to sound more European or more American? This is part of your identity. So by removing your name, by destroying your name, you are destroying part of your identity. And of course, Malcolm X did not want his slave master's name to be in his name. Why should he have the name of someone who owned his grandfather or owned his ancestors? So very, very wise. I like that, mashallah, right? I'm going to show you a quick poem, and then I will just talk about the first page, and then I'll end the class. This is a very, very interesting poem written by a little black boy. Remember, they used to call black people colored, right? So this little black boy, he wrote this very interesting poem, and the title of the poem is "And You Call Me Colored." Okay, guys, listen to what this little black boy says. Okay, he wrote this poem, and by the way, I think he won the first place prize for poetry in this. Okay, so he says, when I was born, I was black. When I was sad, I was black. When I was hot, I was black. When I was sick, I was black. When I was scared, I was black. And then he says, when you was born, he's talking to the white people now. He says, when you was born, you was pink. When you was sad, you was blue. When you was hot, you was red. When you was sick, you was green. When you was scared, you was yellow. And you call me colored? Beautiful, mashallah. Okay, this little boy, he's attacking the term colored, because white people called black people colored. He's like, why are you calling us colored? As a black person, I am born black and then I die black. But for white people, you're the colored ones, not me. Colored, when a white person is born, they're pink. When they're scared, they're blue, and so on and so forth. You understand? When they die, they're gray. So it's beautiful. I like how this young boy was actually attacking the fact that white people called them colored, right? Now, I don't have time, Taban, to cover the entire text, guys, but I will just quickly talk about the first page, okay? So, yeah, so here, guys, remember, this is an autobiography. This is not a story. This is not fiction. This is real life. This person, remember, this was written by Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington, he was an African American. He was forcefully taken from his house. His parents and himself, they were forcefully taken from Africa, and they were taken to America to work as slaves. But then later on in his life, he became a free man. So now he's telling us a bit about his life when he was a child. So the very first sentence you can see at the very top here, it says what? I was born a slave. Imagine I ask you to write an account about your life, right? Imagine I tell you guys, I want you all to write an essay, or I want you all to write an account about your life. You're going to say, well, I was born in Jabriya, I was born whatever. I was born in 1990, I was born in the year 2000 in Al-Hadi Hospital, or I was born in Mustashfa Mubarak, whatever, right? So all of you know exactly where you were born, when you were born. If you ask your parents, by the way, ask your mom, she will tell you exactly what time you were born. Your father has no idea what's happening. But anyway, your mother will tell you exactly what time you were born, what day. Everyone knows their birthday, right? Bayan, when is your birthday?
October 1st.
Okay, great. What else? Who else? Rahaf, are you there or are you busy? Rahaf, are you there? Maybe she's busy.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, Rahaf, you're here. Okay, Rahaf, when were you born? What year? Or when's your birthday?
January 28th.
January 20th. Do you know where you were born? Which hospital?
Yeah.
Which hospital?
مستشفى الجهرة.
Oh wow, Jahra. That's nice. Okay, interesting. So Mustashfa al-Jahra, January 28th. So again, for us, we're lucky because we know exactly what day we were born, what month, what time, even where. Do you think the people who were taken as slaves, do you think they know exactly what day, what time, and where they were born? No, طبعا, right? So he says, على طول, from the very first
Yeah, they
page.
don't know.
Yeah, they don't know because the white people who took them, they don't really care. Okay? So he says, I was born a slave on a plantation in Franklin County, Virginia. I am not quite sure of the exact place or exact date of my birth, but at any rate, I suspect I must have been born somewhere and at some time. Imagine not knowing imagine not knowing your date of birth. Because these people were forcefully taken from their homes, from their country, طبعا they had no idea when they were born, where they were born, what day, what time, nothing. He says, the earliest impressions I can now recall are of the plantation and the slave quarters. The latter being the part of the plantation where the slaves had their cabins. So his earliest memories were, of course, on the farm, on the plantation, and of course the slave quarters. The slave quarters is the little cabins, like this, like the little place where the slaves lived. The slaves they did not live with the white people. They lived outside on the plantation in a small hut, in a small cabin. My life had its beginning in the midst of the most miserable, desolate, and discouraging surroundings. He was born in one of the worst periods. This poor miskin guy who's writing this account. He was born during the period of slavery, of course. This was so, however, not because my owners were especially cruel, for they were not, as compared with many others. I was born in a typical log cabin. I lived with my mother and a brother and sister till after the Civil War, when we were all declared free. So he says, I was born during slavery. It was one of the worst periods in history. I lived with my mother. I had a brother and a sister. And then, of course, until after the Civil War, when we all became free, when the white people gave us our freedom. Okay, guys. So this is the beginning of the autobiography, and it starts out by giving us a little history about his origins. Where was he born? Who was he? And so on and so forth. If I ask you the same thing, if I ask you to write a little paragraph about your life, you might say, well, I was born in the year 2000 in Al-Jahr Hospital or in Mustashfa Mubarak, and January 28, March 12, whatever, and so on and so forth, okay? He says, of my ancestry, I know almost nothing. So of his family history, he knows almost nothing. Why? Because they were taken as slaves. The white people did not really care about the history of these people. In the slave quarters and even later, I heard whispered conversations among the colored people of the tortures which the slaves, including no doubt my ancestors on my mother's side, suffered in the middle passage of the slave ship while being conveyed from Africa to America. So he heard stories from other people, from other slaves, about how the black people were tortured and they were abused when they were taken from Africa all the way to America. And then this is the last paragraph I'll read, and then we can end the class. And then he says, in the days of slavery, not very much attention was given to family history and family records, that is, black family records. Like today, when you want to get married, sometimes maybe your parents might ask you, right? Sometimes you ask about the family history, right? When you want to get married, where this person who's coming into our house, which family is he from, right? Is he from a good family, bad family, and so on and so forth? Back during the slavery days, the white people did not keep any records of any of the family history. They don't really care about the black people. He says, my mother, I suppose, attracted the attention of a purchaser who was afterwards my owner and hers. So someone came and bought his mother, and then after buying his mother, his mother gave birth, and then of course he became the property of that person as well. So he owned his mother, he also owned him. He says her addition to the slave family attracted about as much attention as the purchase of a new horse or cow. Guys, can you imagine? The guy who bought his mother, it was very normal. It was like buying a cow or a horse. Imagine you go to Souk Mbarakiya during the days of slavery, you're like, can I have 2 cows, a horse, and a human, please? That's it. Again, buying a human was just like buying an animal to them. Of my father, I know even less than of my mother. I do not even know his name. Imagine, this guy does not even know his father's name. I have heard reports to the effect that he was a white man who lived on one of the nearby plantations. Whoever he was, I never heard of his taking the least interest in me or providing in any way for my rearing. But I do not find a special fault with him. He was simply another unfortunate victim of the institution. Okay? So basically, his father might have been a white man. This basically means that his mother was abused. His mother was sexually abused and she became pregnant, and he is the result of that unfortunate situation. You understand? So his mother was abused by a white man, most likely, and he was the result. She became pregnant and he came to existence. And he says, I don't blame my father because at the time it was normal for white people to abuse black people. Imagine, his father never asked about him. He never is like, oh, where's my child? What's his name? He doesn't even know the name of his father. And upon the white man, after abusing his mother, he just left, of course, because he was an abuser. He was white. The person he abused was black. He didn't really care. And he says, my father was also a victim because at that time it was normal. It was normal. The white people hated the black people. They brainwashed white people to look down upon black people. Black people were inferior. So you can do whatever you want. You can abuse them, you can kill them, you can torture them. Adi. This was the norm of society back then during slavery, unfortunately, okay? And of course, here in the small bubble, it says children of slaves became slaves, and usually their family history is often forgotten or destroyed. Okay, guys? I will stop over here because you guys have to have iftar very soon. So thank you guys so much. Any questions, by the way? Any questions?